educational background.
Okay.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Milford Board of Selectmen meeting, Monday, March 19th. Tonight's sole business and on the agenda is to conduct interviews for the 3 finalists for the town council position. Rick, feel free to jump in. I just want to give the people watching just how we got to this point. In case I miss any details, feel free to jump in. The board appointed a search committee made up of attorneys Laura Mann and Jed Nozzle, with our former town council, Jerry Moody, and our town administrator, Rick Villani, also attending all of the screening meetings and the initial interviews. And we are now down to 3 finalists that on paper are all very qualified for the town council position. And our first interviewee is Charles D. Body Jr. Welcome, Charles.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, if it's okay with you, why don't we start just by introducing ourselves to Charles publicly, and then maybe, Charles, you can take it from there. Tell us about yourself, give your information. We do have your cover letter and your resumes. We've had them for quite a few days now, so that everyone was able to go through it. And then after that, casual exchange, we can certainly get to any questions or anything that comes up if you're comfortable with that.
That's fine.
All right, great. I'm Will Kincaid. I'm the chairman of the Milford Board of Selectmen.
I'm Bill Buckley. I've been on the board 13 years now, I think.
My name's Mike Walsh. This is my first year on. I'm retiring as a 9-year school committee member.
All right, Charles, why don't you take it from there and give us a little bit of your background, and more so for the public that's watching.
Well, I'm a resident of Bellingham. Been living in Bellingham since 2004. My wife is from Bellingham. She and her mother teaches in Bellingham Public School System. I'm originally from Lawrence, Massachusetts, which is where I currently work. I'm employed by the city of Lawrence as its city attorney. I've worked for the city of Lawrence full-time since 2000. I have served as its city attorney since 2003. Just for your edification, the law practice in Lawrence, it's a department within City Hall. At one time, it had 9 employees. It's now got 4. As you may recall, the city of Lawrence had some budget problems, and as a result of that, we had a lot of layoffs. We provide general representation to the city. We draft ordinances, review all the contracts for the city as to form. We represent the city in litigation that the city brings, as well as representing the city in actions brought against it. We negotiate the contracts for the city. And in the course of doing that, we appear before all sorts of different boards and tribunals and courts throughout the Commonwealth, and in federal court as well. So we have a very busy practice. 75,000 residents in the city of Lawrence, and we handle the pothole claims, we handle general negligence claims against the city. At one time we used to, but don't any longer handle parking ticket appeals. But we handle tax abatement appeals to the Appellate Tax Board, Commission Against Discrimination appeals. We handle police excessive use of force cases and things of that nature. So it's a very generalized practice in the municipal law field. In terms of my personal background, I started out as an attorney 30 years ago doing real estate. I went on and did, for a few years, personal injury work, which included representing plaintiffs in personal injury cases, as well as, in particular, workers' compensation cases, which is an expertise that comes in handy as city attorney for the city of Lawrence. From there, I went and represented banking institutions during the 90s. From 91 to 98, I worked in a law firm in Chelmsford, Massachusetts, represented a lot of national banking organizations such as the FDIC, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and so forth. And as you know, a lot of the banks were going under at that time. And I was representing them with respect to liquidating a lot of the assets, doing some foreclosure work, doing evictions after foreclosure, but perhaps the bulk of my practice at that time was deficiency suits, where you go after someone who had borrowed money, and after the foreclosure there weren't sufficient funds to pay the debts. So I got a lot of experience doing collection work at that time, as well as evictions. After that, I went to work in Manchester, New Hampshire, again doing general litigation, including some personal injury, some medical malpractice. For the city of Lawrence, I have handled election work, that is overseeing elections, but also overseeing recounts and about 6 or 7 recall petitions. I've done construction law. In particular, we built several schools at the beginning of the 2000s, and there were some defects in the construction. There was some construction that was done not according to the plans, and as a result, we ended up with mold growth in the buildings, and we litigated that. That was a very extensive, long-term litigation. We farmed some of it out, and eventually the mayor discharged to the outside counsel, and I took it on and finished it up. But we did successfully settle it. We're in the terms right now of signing the settlement agreement and the stipulation of dismissal. So in a very general sense, that's my experience. But I've got, in addition to that, I served 6 years on the zoning board of the city of Lawrence, and I also served for 3 years as its land use planner. So I had a lot of background in land use, reading of plans. I approved the approval not required plans, reviewing titles and things like that. I do a lot of tax title work, tax title foreclosures for the city of Lawrence. When I first started in the position of city attorney in Lawrence, we had 440 cases in land court for tax title foreclosure. Today we have perhaps 10, 12 active cases, and the reason is we focused on getting rid of a lot of those. And that is a kind of a quality of life issue in the city of Lawrence, because if you have a property that no one's taking responsibility for and nobody's paying taxes, it lies fallow and it attracts crime and attracts debris and so forth. And so eliminating that removes blight from the neighborhoods, and that's something that's of particular importance to the citizens of Lawrence. So again, that's in a general sense what I've done. And of course, you have my resume and you have my cover letters, which also details a lot more about my experience.
No, it absolutely does. Thank you, Charles. Bill?
Good to see you here. Congratulations, having gone through the screening process. It would mean to me that with the individuals that were doing the screening and the great faith I have in them, that you're accomplished, and just getting here is a big deal.
That's kind of you to say that. Thank you.
So I want to acknowledge that. Everything being hypothetical, I wanted to get an understanding of just your thought process, how you work. And I want to give a hypothetical when we talk about settling claims or litigating. Decision to settle a claim or litigate. And I'd like to hear it in 2 aspects. One is claims against the town, and the second aspect is where you need to pursue going after somebody else, business or citizen, for whatever reason. Take me through the thought process that you work through before you make a recommendation to attempt to litigate or settle.
I think what you look at first, at least the way I approach it, is to look at what the claim is, what's the nature of the claim. A lot of times, if you look at a pleading when it first comes in, if it's a claim being brought against a municipality, the initial reaction is, uh-oh, because you're looking at it from the plaintiff's perspective. They're putting their best case on paper and bringing it to you, and naturally, if it's at all persuasive, it should be persuading that you may have some issues. So you look at that, and then you have to take it apart and pick it apart bit by bit, see what you might dispute in terms of the facts, see where the law doesn't support it. And then based upon that, you have to come with a comprehensive opinion as to what the likelihood of success would be against a municipality. But in addition to that, you have to talk to the parties involved. I think one of the biggest problems or the biggest failures of counsel are when you don't talk to the people who are directly involved in the decision-making that gave rise to the litigation. Because you need to hear their story, and they have a story that isn't portrayed in the pleading that was filed against you. You have to find out what that is. And you have to find out what defenses they think that they have, or why something was done the way it was done. So it may be very good to just analyze it in terms of its presentation and the law and the facts, but you also have to have the counterfacts. Then once you've done all of that, then you revise your initial opinion based upon the additional information, and you make a recommendation. Ultimately, it's the client's decision whether to settle or not to settle, whether to go towards litigation. I think one of the other factors that you look at with these cases is not simply what's the likelihood of success, what's the cost versus the ultimate liability if we are to be proven wrong. So there are many cases you can fight to the ends of the earth, and you can waste untold resources. And when I say resources, I'm not just talking money, but I'm also talking time, personnel time, personnel emotion, personnel investment in it, because oftentimes these complaints are personal to the people who are named as defendants. Many times it might be, let's say, the town of Milford was a defendant, but it's individuals within that town, and you have to be mindful. You can't be overly sensitive to the fact that it's the town's liability, it's the town's payout perhaps, but you have to be mindful of the fact that there are emotions involved. People don't like being sued, they don't like to be the subject of a lawsuit, and it can have a chilling effect on their ability to perform their job faithfully in the future if they're constantly in fear of being sued, which is also why it's a good idea, if you're representing them, to do it effectively so that they're not fearful.
How about town claims against others where,
I think
you know, the idea, I kind of want to map your thought process out to
Decide whether to litigate it, go to court, or whether to look for a settlement.
again, the decision rests with the client, but I think in many instances.
The client is the town in this
The
case.
town in
What-
this
How
case.
you come about your recommendation, I guess, is what I'm.
Well, I think, again, you analyze it in terms of likelihood of success. When you're pursuing a claim, you also have to look at other alternatives, such as what's the likelihood of collecting the judgment? So if you're successful and you get a judgment, that's wonderful. If the person then declares bankruptcy, you've spent a lot of resources to get nothing. But more important, I think, is not to have a knee-jerk reaction and sue on everything, but to attempt a conciliation or a mediation of the issues, if possible, and it depends on the nature of the claim. You know, some tax cases, if you can get somebody to enter into a tax payment agreement, and they're making regular payments, and they're paying the late fees, they're paying the interest at the statutory rate, that's wonderful, and you're gonna end up getting something out of that. On the other hand, you could pursue them through a tax title foreclosure, you end up with the property, and maybe the property is a problem. Maybe the property has some environmental contamination so that the town doesn't want it. Maybe we have a property that has, you know, if the town takes it, then there's some other implications as to abutting parcels. So you have to, again, it's a holistic approach, and each case is done on an individual basis. You're asking me for generalizations.
I know it is
And-
generalization.
and generally, that's what you would do, but I think, again, you look at who the party is, what the likelihood of success is, what the counterclaims may be if you open something up, and then also one of the other factors is, can you work something out, and will you be looking to this person to partner with them sometime down the road? Because oftentimes, if this is a relationship that's growing, it's a future relationship, then perhaps something other than just going out and straight litigating the thing might be the best thing.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because I don't think running to court is always the best of solutions for a municipality.
Not every case that's brought in court can be tried, so therefore, if you can find some other way to resolve it and to everyone's satisfaction, sometimes that's the best decision.
Thank you for your answer. I appreciate it.
Okay, Mike?
Charles, again, thank you for being here this evening. As I said to you earlier, impressive educational background.
Thank my parents.
Yeah. I have a couple of just general questions for you. So, how many city councilors in the city of Lawrence?
City councilors, when you say that, you're saying members of the city council?
Correct.
There are 9,
There are 9. You got a mayor,
and a mayor, yes.
10. So how would you describe your relationship with those 10 people?
Well, it would depend on which of the 10, all of the 10. It would depend on which administration, because I'm the longest serving department head in the city of Lawrence right now. It is a stressful situation many times. It's a situation where often you give advice that people don't want to hear. but I think long term, you try to keep the politics out of it. What I learned when I first became an attorney for a municipality was that there's an entire different part of the law that I had never seen. And that is, when you go to school, they teach you the law, how to see things from the plaintiff's perspective, the defendant's perspective, see both sides of the case. And then you have to look, because there's an overriding politics on all sorts of cases. And you have to, if you're going to diligently serve the municipality, you have to try to remove yourself as best you can from the politics and give the advice, and then whatever the client's decision is by whatever body is making that decision, follow that and do your best advocacy. But overall, I am one of the few attorneys in the Commonwealth that represents the city that is actually not hired by the mayor. I'm hired by the city council, but with the mayor's approval. And in the city of Lawrence, politics are very tough, and there is constantly a tension between the legislative and executive branches, and there's constantly an effort to try to muscle in on each other's territory. And I'm often in the middle of that, which makes it a very tense situation at times, but ultimately, you try to do the best, and you try to do whatever is asked of you within the dictates of the law and ethics.
That's a great answer. How would you, if you had to summarize yourself with them? You feel you've been there a long time, so you must have a great ability to mediate, negotiate,
I feel that I do. I will tell you that a couple people have spoken to me within the past few years and said to me, well, you're still there. And I said, yes. And they said, well, you're a survivor. And I suppose, I would never have used that term for myself, but I think maybe it's quite true, at least in that context. But I have mediated many disputes, and I've been told that I would be a good judge because of that. And I believe 90% of the time, what you need to do is get all the decision makers in a room and have people communicate and talk with each other. And if you can do that effectively, and you can show each side some of their strengths and weaknesses, and if you can be respectful of both sides, I think many times you come to a better decision, a better outcome than if you just allow parties to fight amongst themselves. And then try to add on by adding to the mix by you representing one or advocating for one over another.
So you stated earlier that the city of Lawrence is 75,000 residents, and at one time, your legal department had 9 employees.
Yes.
Today, it only has 4. Explain to me how you can effectively serve those 75,000 people on a daily basis when your staff was cut in half.
Well, I will tell you that for 2.5 years, between 2012 and 2014, roughly, in that time frame, I was the only attorney for the city of Lawrence. You're constantly putting out fires. You are constantly bringing work home and doing the best you can. You are constantly without sufficient resources, and you simply keep going in every day and do your best. And how can you effectively do it? By doing the best that you can. If you're in a battle and you have no ammunition, then you just use your head and do the best that you can under the circumstances. If I had a staff of 50 people, I would be far more effective, and I would do much more. But, so you end up becoming very good at prioritizing and very good at, again, communicating with people and trying to tell people that don't have a priority, I understand your needs, I'm as concerned about it as you are, but right now I'm doing this and I will get to it. And then you follow through, and if you say you're gonna get to it and you don't get to it, which happens, you let them know that you haven't gone to it, but it's still on the front burner and you'll get to it shortly. So again, in the 2 years that I was the only attorney representing the city, I had one complaint that I didn't do something timely. And that's a lot of perseverance, a lot of hard work, but also effectively prioritizing. What I generally try to do, I will tell you, what I generally try to do when there are a lot of litigation cases is I try to address the ones that should be knocked out early on in the proceedings. and I try to get them dismissed, or I try to get summary judgment on them so that I'm not wasting additional resources. I can litigate the case, over 4 years and go through all this discovery, but if I've got an out, a procedural defect in the way the case was brought, a lack of standing or a statute of limitations issue, I want to knock the case out right away. I don't want to waste my time on it. I need to spend my time on the cases that are, justifiably real, so to speak.
One more, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Oh, yeah, what I was gonna do is just, I think Bill has more questions
go
too,
ahead.
so maybe we'll each do a
Okay.
question and
All right.
then
Yeah,
we'll go from there. Charles, in Milford, this position has been, quite the topic of conversation, because obviously we've had the same in-house attorney for nearly 40 years. And obviously, you're certainly qualified for the position, but is there, because I mean this in the most positive way of the candidates, and again, there's no local in-house candidate that anyone's competing with, so I guess it's a fair question. How do you compensate for the lack of, institutional knowledge that kind of walked out the door after 40 years that's specific to the town of Milford? I certainly not worried about you knowing municipal law and things of that nature, but.
No, I understand the question. I have it from the other perspective. I am the institutional knowledge in Lawrence. We have new water commissioner. The water commissioner came to me several months ago and he said, we've got an abutter in a neighboring town who wants to tie into our system, blah, 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 blah. I said, stop, I've already litigated that case. So my paralegal, who is the only person who was with me when I was the only attorney for the city, has been in that office for 30 years. So there are times when every once in a while she'll come to me and she'll say, but wait a minute, in 1992, Carol McGravy, who was the attorney before me, addressed that issue. So again, what do you do? If you don't have the institutional knowledge, then you have to look for it. And I would think one of the most important things for whoever takes this position is to talk to Attorney Moody and maintain a good rapport with him and be able to reach out to him on a regular basis. One of the advantages of having someone for so long is that they know their job, the quality of their work, they can almost do it with their eyes closed. One of the disadvantages is sometimes, and I say this this isn't a criticism of anyone in particular, it applies to me as well. When you've been in a position for a long time, sometimes you get too uniform in your thinking, and sometimes there are new, novel ways to approach things. So it's always good to have new knowledge and new information coming in, but with respect to institutional knowledge, you have a town administrator you rely on, you have town personnel you rely on. If it's an issue that pertains to a particular department, you have to ask that department, and then of course you have the records. And if Attorney Moody doesn't know, if the town administrator doesn't know, if the department doesn't know, and there are no records, then the institutional memory wasn't there in the first place.
A great answer, and that was also how I was going to follow up with, hoping you were going to go into finding the resources and who those resources would be. So you definitely hit the second part of my question as well, so thank you.
Thank you.
Good questions. I want to get an understanding of what you think some of the major challenges are for municipalities across the Commonwealth, and specifically, what I'd like you to do is delve into anything that you're aware of or been able to research about your understanding of where Milford is, and any particular challenges that you see for Milford and what you bring for those challenges.
Well, I think one of the major issues that's facing everyone in the Commonwealth right now is the legalization of recreational use of marijuana and how that plays into several respects with respect to communities generally, and then as an employer, as a public employer. I think one of the things we need to start looking at is what does it mean if you test positive for high levels of marijuana usage, for example. Is that still going to carry that same stigma, and what effect does that have when we understand that although it may be legal in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, it's still prohibited federally. So the zoning that is associated with that, the different types of uses, the public usage of it, the public presence of it. In Lawrence today, you can walk out in the public parks, and there are users in the public parks already. And so you have to start drawing the line. Public usage is permissible, but do you want to have it so public? Or is it the sort of thing for zoning purposes? Do you not want it near a school? Do you not want it near a church? Do you not want it near depending upon what, now we could be talking about cultivating, we could be talking about retail sales, I'm just speaking generally.
Sure.
Do you want to have a zone? One of the biggest issues with certain uses, like a lot of the uses that we might consider not so desirable, or some of us would consider not so desirable, such as alcohol sales, adult uses, tattooing and body piercing and things like that. Do you want to have that in one area, or do you want it, spread throughout your community so that there's not a particular area that is affected and that affects one neighborhood over another? So that's one of the issues. And I think one of the other issues that faces every community in Massachusetts, because we are such an old state and because we are so densely populated, is simply the accommodations between development, and in particular commercial development, to serve the needs of the community and the taxpayers who need to go out and shop, versus the need to conserve and preserve historic properties, historic neighborhoods, historic assets, old industrial sites that aren't properly used today or not put to the maximum usage. And then add to that, in some of the cases, environmental contamination and things like that.
How about your understanding of some of the things that Milford may have in front of it, and some of the things that are ongoing? Have you been able to look at those?
I haven't looked at those directly. I will tell you that one of the things that I observe when coming into Milford is simply the fact that you're losing or relocating a lot of businesses, but what's happening is that they're relocating from other sites, and so you have a lot of open space. You also have, in my opinion, and I say this respectfully to you who kind of run the community, you also have some sites in your gateways that are less than aesthetically pleasing and could be spruced up. And there are various ways that you could address that, depending upon whether the property owes taxes, depending upon whether there's some eminent domain background for it, depending upon what exists at the site and what the needs are. And but on the other hand, some good things is I think that with the bike trail and so forth, the town of Milford is attracting people from surrounding communities who want to come here, and they want to use your outdoor resources, your open space, and in turn, they're stopping and they're patronizing restaurants and businesses and things like that.
Great observations, and I appreciate those observations. I wouldn't disagree at all with some of your comments. There are some challenges. You've highlighted some of those, and I appreciate your thoughtfulness and candor, actually.
Explain to me, you started out basically in corporate law and ended up into municipal law, land court for 3 years, and then city attorney in Lawrence, where you still presently are. Must have been a huge change in how you practice law, how you looked at law, and how did you go from the corporate side for so long into the municipal side and step right in and get to work?
Well, there was a transition period, if I could call it that. So I started out in private practice, and I began doing real estate, as I said earlier. I ended up doing litigation. Wasn't necessarily a field that I had looked to enter, but it was the field that was available, the opportunity presented itself. But in 1992, I became a member of the Lawrence Zoning Board of Appeals, and I truly enjoyed that experience. I sat on that board for 6 years while I remained a resident of the city of Lawrence, right until the time I got married. And I had an affinity for that. I have a passion, I guess, for the city of Lawrence. I've had a passion for the city of Lawrence, and in particular, I think that the quality of life in any community depends on how it's built out. And I think a lot of those decisions are made at the zoning level, both by a building inspector or building commissioner, and also by the local zoning board of appeals and the planning board. So the decisions that are made there in those hearing rooms are decisions that will affect the community for 20 or 30 years. So I like that. I became familiar with a lot of the programs in community development, and shortly after I left the zoning board, and a position opened up as the city's land use planner. Land use planner is an advisor to the boards. Talking to Attorney Moody, I know he writes a lot of the zoning board, planning board decisions here in Milford, and that's what the land use planner does in Lawrence. Doesn't write the decisions, but if he or she is good, the memoranda that he or she presents to the board will be such that it can be carved out and cut and pasted and made into the decision ultimately when the hearing minutes are added into it. So in any event, what I did was I became land use planner in the city of Lawrence, and I sat in that position for 3 years. And frankly, it was one of the most fulfilling positions I had because unlike pushing papers in the practice of law, that was something where you made a decision and you could see the result, almost immediately, or within a year or two after construction. You could see the impact that your decision had on the community, and hopefully it was a positive one. So as I sat in that position, the city attorney, the existing city attorney retired, and I was encouraged to apply for the job. Much like this, it was narrowed down to 3 applicants, and I ended up getting the position. And it was a tough change, but it was made tough by the fact that I actually worked as the land use planner and the city attorney for a period of about 6 months until we could get a replacement land use planner. So I was juggling those roles and those positions. So very burdensome in the sense that you have an awful lot on your plate at any given time. But by the same token, because I was able to bounce between the 2 positions, it gave me a little bit of an opportunity to move into the position a little bit more slowly than if I just showed up and that was all I was doing all day long. The other advantage I had at that point was, as I said, we had a staff of 9 people, 4 attorneys, and I could rely on them. So I learned a lot that I didn't already know simply by talking to the people who were in the position and looking at the files that existed. So if I had a case and it was something I had never done in private practice, I would say, do you have an appellate tax board case that we've done before? Let me take a look at that file. And do you have any others? And I'd find other cases that were similar, and that's the best instruction. If you can't speak to Mr. Moody, for example, you look at his work, and that will guide you in a lot of what you'll do. You'll learn more from doing that in just a few minutes than you will from hunting around and doing research independently or online, I think.
Thank you.
Charles, whether it's the Board of Selectmen or another independently elected board or an appointed board, makes a decision that you cannot support. How do you move forward on that? Either you don't support or you cannot support for
Well, I
a number of
think-
reasons, or is that, have you dealt with that in Lawrence?
I deal with that frequently in Lawrence.
Okay.
But I write a lot of ordinances for the city of Lawrence that I don't agree with, or that I don't think should be enacted. But you have to understand your role. It's not my role. I was not elected by the people of the city of Lawrence. I was hired by the city of Lawrence to recommend and to advise, but ultimately, if the legislative authority is vested in an elected board, that board makes that decision. They make that call. My goal, that's why we're attorneys and counselors at law. We're supposed to do some counseling along the way. And so, if it's not illegal and it's not unethical, then sometimes you have to defer because even in private practice, you are not the boss. Your client is the boss. And so if it's something that you disagree with or a strategy that you think is headed straight for failure, but your client's insistent on it, so long as you've done your duty and shown both sides and given what you perceive to be the likelihood of success, and your client, despite your recommendations and advice, wants to go forward, as long as it's not illegal, as long as it's not unethical, that's what you do. But ultimately, I deal with lots of boards, planning board, zoning board, alcohol or licensing board, and so forth in the city of Lawrence. And we don't always see the same on everything, but sometimes you have to say, who's the expert on licensing or on zoning? Is it I or is it the board? And is it a legal issue? That's the other issue. And sometimes if it's a legal issue, you have to explain to the board, I respectfully disagree, but understand this is a legal issue. This is actually something that's in the town council or the city attorney's purview, not in yours. And other times you have to say, it's yours.
Okay, great. Thank you. Bill?
You know, I'm expecting the process to go through some things a little further. You know, we'll look for, you know, potential areas of conflict. So if you may have to state any potential conflicts that might exist. We have your references here, and I thank you for those.
And I can provide more if those aren't sufficient.
No, I would say these are sufficient. There's quite a few, and some,
I tried to provide some from different areas, but in terms of private life, in terms of my volunteer work and so forth, there would be others I could provide if you're interested in that.
what trait do you think, if I were to call all these references, what trait do you think folks would have and say for you? What would you expect to see a common theme coming out of those referrals and references?
Well, I was asked this at the initial interviews, and it's hard to say because
It's other people characterizing you,
well,
that's why.
it's not just that, but how do you say something positive about yourself? Because I certainly don't want to tell you anything negative about me. So
Right.
I want to respond positively, but I also want to be humble. So it's a somewhat tenuous path you walk on, but nonetheless, I would say, I've already said to you, I've been described as a survivor. I don't really feel that I am, but I've heard it from various people, so, and I am the oldest, longest serving, what have you, not oldest, longest serving department. So I guess I'm a survivor. I think I'm competent, I think I'm certainly hardworking. I think I bring I know I bring a sense of humor to my job, and I think sometimes that's the only way that you can deal with high tension and high stress. I think I bring respect. One of the things that certainly is a characteristic I have is my ability to get along with all sorts of people of all different backgrounds, whether they be professional white-collar people or blue-collar folks, poor people, etc. I come from a very blue-collar, in fact, the poorest community in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. That's where I was raised, and that's where I currently have chosen to work. And yet I've gone to some very expensive, prestigious schools, as Mr. Walsh has noted. And so I've been able to get along with people both, very professional and very, large immigrant population. I speak several languages. I understand a lot of cultural differences. And I think, what I often say to people is, what really matters isn't what you see. What's up here and what's in here, what matter. And if you can judge people by those standards, I think you'll find areas of agreement where you can get along and you can get through a lot of difficulties. So I guess that's one of the things.
No,
Or several of the things.
Being in a city form of government, having one mayor, a mayor and city council, and having the mayor have, the same type of latitude for letting people, or ability to let people go or bring in new people, new talent, whatever. Being a survivor is certainly a positive thing. And I appreciate that the second thing you said was respect. So I thank you, and it's no surprise to me after going through this process why you're here.
Thank you.
So you've earned that, and I wanted to say thank you, and
I appreciate that so much. Thanks.
Mike?
I as well would like to say thank you to, I don't have any further questions, Mr. Chairman. Your resume speaks for itself.
Thank you
Thank you
so
for
much.
the references. And I agree with Bill. It'll be interesting to see what the single trait is that comes out of it. I'm sure it'll be positive.
I hope.
So, but again, thank you very, very
Well,
much.
thank
Sorry
you.
you had to wait a little bit.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate coming down, and it's been a very good experience.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Take care, Charles.
Thank you. Pleasure meeting you. Thank you. Thank you.
Take care.
Do you guys want to take 5 minutes or anything, or just want to?
Bill's gonna,
No.
You wanna take 5 minutes?
That's fine.
oh, no, I'm good.
Okay, all right, I'm all set. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Good candidate.
Yeah.
Which mic we going with there, Dan?
I'm just gonna put this a little bit closer to them.
Somebody.
Because this one is Not doing what it's supposed to do.
Hi, Kevin.
Okay, we're getting it?
We're getting it. How are you? Will Kincaid.
Mike Walsh.
Mike,
Bill Buckley. Great meeting you.
thanks for having me.
Welcome. What we'll do is just ask you to introduce yourself publicly. You are being broadcast live this evening. Yes. And just to give a narrative, I mean, we have your cover letters, your resume. Obviously, you made it through the screening committee and the first initial interviews with them. So we're very excited you're here. So if you want to tell us, mostly for the folks watching that obviously don't have this information in front of them, as much as you can, and then we'll go from there, and we'll each ask some questions and have a casual back and forth.
Well, thank you for having me tonight. I really appreciate the opportunity to interview. My name is Kevin Corridon. Currently Assistant City Solicitor for the cities of Beverly and the city of Chicopee. And I also have a small, modest private practice on the side. I'd like to first say what a beautiful town hall you folks have here. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I've been in a lot of public buildings over the past 20 years. I've been in state and local government for about that long, 21 years or so. Started out at the State House, worked there for a few state legislators, then went to law school and started working in municipal law for the city of Chicopee, where I really cut my teeth on procurement law and really worked under a great mentor there that made me familiar with just about anything that we would deal with as a municipality. From there, I've been working for a couple of different cities. I went to the city of Boston for a while, following Chicopee. I was in the city of Gloucester briefly, and then I moved down to the city of Beverly part-time and the city of Chicopee, where I am now. I do work in both communities concurrently, part-time, and it just works out well, and for both the mayors who I feel like I've developed a good relationship with, and I feel like I give them what they need on a daily basis. I'm at their disposal for evening calls, 24 hours a day, whatever they need me to do. And really the issues that I deal with on a regular basis are very common and routine. Everything from routine issues, from public records, conflict of interest, employee issues, open meeting law issues, municipal finance, any kind of state law versus town charter or bylaw conflict or reconciliation. I'm very fluent, I think, in reconciling issues that may arise on that front. Also, I work with public bodies all the time, public employees, answering their questions every day. You know, any number of different issues faced by communities will, you know, sometimes I compare it to being a hockey goalie of sorts. You never know what the day is going to bring once you just got to come to work warmed up. And, you know, after that, the chips fall where they may. And I've really gotten myself professionally to a point where I can handle almost anything that I know of that's come into my communities that I work for currently on an effective professional high level. That's with the mayor, the city council, the public meetings, and major issues facing cities and towns. And I know every city and town is different. Every city and town has evolved over the years differently, and they have different needs and different populations. And, you know, they're run by different folks and who have a certain prerogative of where they envision the town going. And I try to tell people that I work for, you know, you have your agenda as the administration, and I try to get you there within the law and try to keep everybody out of trouble at the same time. You know, I've worked with the legislature on a lot of different things too, and in preparing for this, I went through a couple of Selectmen meetings, and particularly of interest to me was the open forum last fall for the purchase of the Milford Water Company. And I found it very interesting how the council for the city and in-house counsel walked the public through that process. I found it very interesting, and you folks too. It was a major undertaking, and I'm not sure what the status is now, but I find it very interesting how I feel like it's an aggressive, proactive agenda for folks to take, and it's a very responsive way to run town government, and it was just very interesting to me to see what I do and see Jerry Moody, for instance, get up and explain, the steps that we have to take legislatively to make this all happen, or what's involved in due diligence and how we get from A to B, and and essentially walking the general public through that, who they may understand it from the media standpoint or what's been said about it on Facebook or whatever else. But to hear the people that are making decisions and explain what they've learned through the process from the professionals that everyone's kind of gotten together to make this work, and convey that to the public in a meaningful way and get the town from A to B. That way, it was very interesting to see that happen and unfold. A lot of times, it depends on, I've seen 5 different law departments run at this point. Some good, some not so good, and all of them had their own evolution too. I mean, at times we saw good things happen, and other times we saw bad things happen. But it's always interesting to see how they handle it. And for cities particularly, I feel like my town experience is really more geared toward my personal experience as a member of the finance committee in my own town. So that's really the town experience I'm getting quite an education right now on. But watching cities, it's sometimes really reactive, and you really have to be on your toes and understand the issues before you go talking to the public in public forums and answering questions off the cuff. So if tonight for any reason I answer a question, I'd like to get back to you on that. Don't read into that. Hopefully I would be prepared in coming days.
Bill, do you want to start off?
Yeah, I want to start off by first congratulating you in getting to this point, because the folks that have been doing the interviews and the screening process, I find to be very trustworthy, very thoughtful, and I know that they do their background. So for you to be here, that says something significant about you and your background, and it's clear to me why from your resume. What I wanted to understand is if you could just walk me through a thought process. I'm kind of a process guy. I'd like to understand your thought process and what you go through in determining whether to settle a claim or litigate that claim. Because it can be the answer can be a lot of different things, but I'd like to hear your perspective, not only claims against the town, but maybe claims against someone else on behalf of the town.
Well, it would be a case-by-case basis, very fact-sensitive, and it would depend on what resources the town has available to it. That would largely weigh into, and I know that Attorney Moody has the legal department here set up in a very efficient, at least that's my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree.
As a matter of fact, I wouldn't mind coming in and taking over the reins of such a well-run legal department, because in looking at the work that he's accomplished here, it's a lot of work has been done over the past numerous decades to put this town where it is. To answer your question, I think, what resources do I have available? Is it an issue area where I'm competent to litigate the case and try the case? My experience, it rises to the level of jury trials in the Superior Court, which is a large majority of what the town would probably face, including eminent domain or property damage claims against Verizon, just for instance.
Yeah.
So, the routine litigation matters, I feel confident to handle in-house. So it will really depend on what the magnitude of the case was. Is it a routine tree claim, or is it a employee car accident? Is it handled by an insurance company? And I know that Milford, I think, is self-insured, so a lot of that stuff will be done in-house, and we'd have to litigate claims and have a claims management process, which
Trying to figure out, though, when you're deciding, do I settle or do I go litigate this? And I know it's fact sensitive,
yeah,
but
it depends.
there's a lot of cases where, you can be 50-50 sitting there, and what helps you through that thought process?
Well, I consider the city's defenses first. And there are some statutory defenses that I have to go through, and if we qualify for some of those defenses, then I defend the case. And I make a judge send us to trial, and if we get to the trial, then at that point, I would reevaluate the case. And
How about claims against others? Where you're looking for, on behalf of the community, you're looking for some judgment.
again, it depends on the situation. Is it a major issue, like the purchase of a water company or the joining of a regional dispatch center, for instance? That's one of the major litigations that the city of Beverly's recently been involved in, where we proactively went and sought to extricate ourselves from that arrangement. That was a very big litigation for the city, and it's settled and it's done. But the consideration that went into that case was, what does it mean as a matter of policy for the city to be part of that entity? And the administration at the time decided it was not a good public policy to be part of that entity, and that weighed into whether or not we went to the mat over.
Sure.
So in terms of going after certain parties or individuals, it really depends for me on what the circumstances are. And I don't, I know we're in a public forum, so I don't like to really get really into the nitty-gritty, but
Yeah.
the reality is that you have a constituency out there too that are tax-paying residents of the town. And, sometimes it's not in the best interest to carry on a litigation against people that live in the town, for instance. But I'm the steward of the public interest and the town's interests, so I have to at least put forth a litigation strategy and a diplomatic effort to, sorry about that. A diplomatic effort to decide what the best course for the town is, bring it to you to make a policy decision. Is this something that we want to pursue? And then I go do it.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're going to use the same format. You
Yeah,
wanna-
we'll each do a
okay.
question and then go back. Sure, Mike?
All right, thank you.
So, City of Chicopee, City of Beverly. How many city councilors? In each?
13 in Chicopee and 9 in Beverly.
Describe your ability to get along, to work through concerns, to listen to both sides of the argument from that many people.
Well, if it's a little bit different. I work for the administration of the city, so the city council technically, as a body, has to ask council for an opinion. But obviously, the practical reality is you have a number of people coming into the office every day, asking questions, and
What if they don't agree with your opinion?
I've become known as Attorney No, pretty much wherever I go, having nothing to do with my efforts to advance an agenda within the law, but really, sometimes you get folks that come in that there's a lot of things that I do every day that are counterintuitive to a lot of lay people, that they don't really understand why I can't either help them, I can't advise them, because I represent the city or the town. So I can't tell, for instance, someone off the street what their legal interests are against the town. But if it's a city councilor, I can take the time to advise them, what are my thoughts on an issue, generally off the record, and say, this is what my preliminary thoughts are. But if you wanted to,
My question is geared to city councils, not to the general public.
right,
How do you get along with different elected bodies?
every council that I've known has different personalities on it. Some are wildly, the range is all over the place. There's very aggressive city councilors, and there's very passive city councilors, for better or worse. Some are very thoughtful, some are more aggressive and speak their mind a little bit more off the cuff. So I try to maintain a balance of, here's my opinion, this is what the law says, and these are the consequences of what you've asked me. In terms of, is there a real issue in front of the city council currently? I try to maintain the course of the conversation back to what's an issue that's going to come before you, and what are the legal implications of it. to try to, what's the scope really of how I can help you? And try to apply that to what they're attempting to do, or what their agenda is as a counselor.
The reason I ask that question is Milford on a smaller scale is gonna have the same issues, and how do you feel personally that you could handle those concerns that are coming your way?
Again, it depends on the issue,
Okay.
and I would just handle it as diplomatically as I can, and
Would you say that's a strength of yours, being diplomatic?
I like to think of myself as diplomatic. It's served me well, but, everybody has their moments. So I can't say that every single time I'm knocking the ball out of the park in terms of, because it's public service, and, it's messy, it's a democratic process. Not everyone's gonna like me, and that's just the reality of it all.
Thank you.
No problem. As I said to the candidate before you, obviously with Attorney Moody leaving, who's been here for more or less 40 years, that's a lot of institutional knowledge specific of Milford. How are you going to compensate for that? Again, I'm not worried about necessarily your experiences or your education, but coming into obviously a new town where all of the department heads, as well as this board and all the other boards and committees, have had the same attorney for 40 years.
I'm going to make sure I have Attorney Moody's phone number, first and foremost. I also know that he intends to play a smaller role here. It's not like he's not that I would expect to rely on him in any way. I mean, I expect to walk into a law department and run it on day one. I also know that there's a very competent staff already in place that I would rely on heavily to move forward. I've always relied on the consistent existence of staff in every law department with institutional memory and knowledge to assist me to not make any gaffes, or in learning the landscape, trying to figure out how best to move forward, how best to formulate decisions, what the work product looks like, and what the decision makers expect in terms of timeline, town meeting process and all of that, which I expect to be up to speed on, were you to hire me right away. So there is institutional memory built into the organization right now that I would take advantage of. I've always been a persistent member of the Municipal Law Association, and we have a very active back and forth amongst all of the lawyers throughout the Commonwealth, and it's a really good resource. And, I've tuned into that for the past 12 years. That's as a municipal lawyer. So I've seen a lot of the issues that towns face as well as cities. And there's a lot of crossover. But in terms of getting up to speed, I have a pretty good experience starting in new cities. So.
Okay, thank you. Bill?
There are a lot of challenges facing municipalities across the Commonwealth. I'd like to hear your thoughts on what do you think a couple of those are, and what you've gleaned in your understanding of some of those that uniquely challenge Milford.
Three come to mind. One is obviously, and this is more of a very popular media issue, and that's the opioid crisis that's going on, and whether or not cities and towns are going to decide to battle big pharma in terms of their effects on cities and towns. I think that's one issue that is out there. That's kind of a big picture item that it's not really day-to-day facing the cities and towns. But occasionally litigation like that comes along that, for better or worse, towns may want to be a part of in the, if there happens to be a settlement of sorts down the road that possibly Milford or any other community would want to take part in if they're affected by that issue. Second issue would be, and for whatever reason, I don't know if it's the age of our roads, but public-private way issues is really a persistent issue, and repaving roads throughout the Commonwealth Towns trying to maximize their Chapter 90 dollars to make improvements to the streets and ways is a big issue that, you know, residents are discovering for the first time. I don't know if this is a pervasive problem in Milford or not, but, you know, they discover they live on a private way and it's not a town way. You know, in cities anyway, that's been a pervasive issue. The other is problem properties is from town to town sometimes an issue. And, you know, you have to balance economic difficulties with, you know, blight, essentially. And, you know, how long do people stay in their homes? And it's, you know, to what degree is the town willing to let things slide? And everyone's got to, every homeowner has a responsibility to maintain their property to a certain degree and pay their taxes. And there's that delicate balance between folks that have lived here forever and are valuable residents, but, you know, things change. So
Milford, what do you think? Because I agree, you know, those are challenges certainly across the Commonwealth. What about Milford, just from your understanding and your ability to glean our, you know, Google or wherever, right?
yeah, I mean, Milford, what I've been able to glean from the past few weeks is how long we've been participating in this undertaking really is in the water company.
It's still ongoing.
Yeah, I mean, I did notice a couple of other issues, and I think it was last week when you folks approved the marijuana distributor, medical marijuana distributor. So, you know, issues that, and again, that's another kind of one-hit issue potentially that has a limited effect, but is kind of monumental for the town. At least in determining public policy going forward on that issue. So, other than that, you did build a school or did you
did.
finish a school recently?
We did,
And
yeah.
It was a big public school building authority.
It was.
Yeah. So, you know, if there's any contractor litigation that might fall out of that,
As a matter of fact.
you know, that never happens. Believe me, that never happens.
Yeah. We're not the first.
Yeah, I was privileged enough to work on, the city of Chicopee built 2 high schools in the early 2000s. And there was a lot of litigation involved in that, or pre-litigation that ended up in a lot of back and forth settlements. Some eminent domain issues. Chicopee recently is going through a huge sewer separation project, a lot of Orangeburg pipe in that town that has to be dealt with, and you know, backflow device programs is a big issue in terms of getting homeowners on board with participating and trying to limit the cost to the city and dealing with DEP and all the ins and outs in terms of, you know, getting the town or the cities that I work for, whether it's MS4 permits, any new outflow permits that we need, the NIPD's permits. I'm not sure how Milford deals with its waste, but, you know, there's all kinds of municipal dealings that have to go on with the state with that, and the regional entities. So, you know, I've had a lot of experience dealing with regional entities, commissions, boards and commissions, state statutes dictating how we conduct ourselves. So I feel like there's a lot of ways for me, a lot of tools that I have in my repertoire to bring to bear on whatever Milford's facing right
Well,
now.
I appreciate the fact that you looked into some of the challenges that we have, and that's at least to your credit. That's all I have right now, Mr. Chairman. If it gets
Okay.
back around, it's great.
Mike?
You bring up an interesting statement, problem properties, and every community has them. Tell me how you, as town council, would work with all the different boards in the community to proactively go after these communities, whether it's getting homeowners or businesses back up and taxes paid and current. There's one particular that I talk about all the time that it's one of the first ones you see when you come to town. That's a vacant lot. It's an eyesore. How would you, as town council, come forward and say, these are things that we need to proactively start working on?
If you came to me with a property like that, I would go to the housing court and petition for a receivership right away. And usually there's a pre-process to that in dealing with owners, but if it's a persistent problem And it's something, it's a property that really should be back on the tax rolls right away. There's no sense in dealing with problem property owners that just refuse obtusely to cooperate. You go right to the housing court, get a receiver appointed, bring them into the court and give them an opportunity to rectify the situation, particularly if it's an out-of-town owner or someone who's not in town. You know, there's rental properties, you could be anywhere, you could be in New Jersey,
Right,
and, you know, they don't care.
right.
We make them care. So,
Thank
that'll be my first goal. But otherwise, we try to institute programs where, you know, if a homeowner's having difficulties or whatever else, we work with them usually at the housing court to create a process where we call them in a housing court, we say, what's the deal? Can you do A, B, C, and D and comply with the code? Here's your plan, we'll give you 30 days to comply. If you don't, we've got to come back. And if it becomes a problem after that, we take it to the next step. And either get injunctive relief or do the work ourselves or get a receiver.
Thank you. Thank you.
Kevin, because your experience in Chicopee and Beverly, you were the assistant city solicitor. Were there multiple assistants, or were you the sole one?
In Beverly?
Yes, or Beverly and Chicopee.
In Chicopee,
How did
there's
it- how did
7
it work?
part-time
Okay.
attorneys. There's one city solicitor and the rest are part-time. There's 1 assistant and the rest are associates.
Okay,
Each of them have, the assistant is more general. Currently, they do the housing court matters, receiverships, et cetera, problem properties. I do most of the oddities of municipal law, contract review, land use issues, some zoning, draft orders that go to the city council, that type of thing. There's a chief of litigation, there's a police person, and there's a city council person, and there's another litigation person. In Beverly, there's 2 full-time, 1 full-time city solicitor and a full-time assistant city solicitor, and I'm part-time there as well, so there's 3 of us.
and if you did get the position here, how do you envision you transitioning from an assistant solicitor to driving the bus, which, in the law department here, which Jerry has done for 40 years, so. To
Well-
me, I'm not an attorney, but, you know, what would that transition look like?
Right now, I feel like I've got all the experience, but none of the responsibility.
Okay.
I want that, I want the responsibility, basically.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense, okay.
So, you know, I'm in the bullpen, essentially, in municipal lawyer land. And I feel that it's about time I stepped up and ran my own law department. I feel like I'm ready and I want to do it. And something, you know, and I chose this position specifically. I intentionally applied for this position because I was distantly familiar with Mr. Moody's tenure here. And a couple of the things resonated with me when he was in the newspaper, and he said he had, I hope he doesn't mind me, and I don't want to take his comments out of context, so I apologize if I do that. I would like to say, though, what did resonate with me is he was able to pick and choose cases that he believed were strong cases for the town and go litigate that case. And he had a certain discretion, and I have my opinions about our case load, and I have my opinions about the cases we should and shouldn't try, and I would like to put that to the test, to be honest, at this point. And I make a good case on a regular basis for certain things, and it's just never been my decision. And it's just about time that it is. Of course, within the prerogative of the decision makers and the leadership of the town.
Understood. No, that's a good answer. I appreciate that. Bill?
You know, I'm anticipating that the process would include reference checks on the background information. You know, I'm anticipating, a little more time being spent once we, get to the, final decision before employment is offered. I don't expect that to take long, by the way, but I'm just curious, what do you think the folks that you provide references are going to agree on in terms of your skill set, and what do you think is going to be a common trend coming from those?
It always depends on who you ask.
Yeah, right.
Stellar to, you know,
But
it's,
your references.
oh, my references? You know.
I'm sorry,
it's-
I didn't make myself clear.
That's fine. Well, I did forward two, but I mean, I'm happy to provide more. You know, the further along I get in the process, the more, you know, realistic we are about making an offer to me. I
Sure.
would be happy to provide additional references. But, you know, they are going to speak very highly of me in terms of the body of knowledge that I bring to my job every day.
What are the traits you think they might agree on?
Just that. Tell me what the issue is. He's going to be someone that you're going to be able to go to on a daily basis, explain your issue to him, and within a matter of minutes, he's going to be able to identify the scope of what you're talking about and basically redirect you and provide questions that you weren't asking really the right questions, you know, necessarily. So sometimes people have it in their minds they want to come and do something, or they've got a great idea and they didn't think of, well, you know, all the different factors in bringing that to fruition. So having a broad body of knowledge in municipal law allows me to kind of narrow the issues that they need me to answer in order to get what they need accomplished. So issue spotting for me is one of my strengths. And having a broad area of knowledge assists in, you know, there's so many things that municipal law departments do now that you really have to have a broad, and be a utility person, essentially. And, you know, I take that knowledge and I go through my checklist. I say, all right, what is this person here for? What do they need me to do? What's their initial question? Are there any broader implications to that? And kind of give them an answer that's going to hopefully satisfy them, number one. And then set them on their way in terms of accomplishing what they've set out to do, or answering their question as quickly as possible. It could be a very simple question. It could be a simple no. Unfortunately, many times it is a simple no.
Yeah.
And
When you're
here's,
asked if you can put your mailbox on somebody else's property, you say, the answer's no.
right, and can
Bad idea.
can these folks come on and assist the town or city in chopping down these trees that are problematic? And, you know, can so-and-so park their camper in this parking lot? You know, it's
Yeah.
anything, you name it. We get a lot of procurement questions. Well, why can't I just go to Joe Smith's towing company and conduct this business on behalf of the town? You know, that's worth $35,000 a pop. And yeah, I mean, that's a wild
No,
example.
those are good examples. No, it happens.
So people, in conducting their daily business, they don't realize that there's a mental process that you have to go through, and you have to go through it rigorously to make sure you don't, oh, you know what, I forgot about that. I've got to get 3 quotes.
Yeah.
Oh, I've got, you know, ooh, we got to put this out to bid. Or, you know, there's a state list for this. You know, the easy solve. Let's go to the state list.
Okay. I appreciate it.
So that's what they would say. To answer your question, I feel like that's what they would say about my
Okay.
experience.
No, that's helpful.
The other reference I provided you would say that I'm an aggressive litigator for cities and towns. And, you know, I will litigate a case against Verizon in front of a jury and win. So,
Okay.
Before I ask my last question, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to come this evening. You're a long way away from home.
Yeah.
I'm closer than I am normally at work, so.
I just have to ask you, why did you choose municipal law and why do you stay in it?
Municipal law chose me, more or less. I started out in the DA's office in Springfield District Court, a very busy court. I had an opportunity to start there, and it was a great opportunity. I ran for public office, and I lost, and I left the DA's office at the time. And during that campaign, I worked as a contractor for the Chicopee Law Department for my mentor there. And, you know, I turned out I loved it. You know, so, and I just got really into it. It was fascinating on a daily basis. I know that sounds strange to some people, but it's literally so different every day you walk in. You don't know what you're going to get. And some days it is stressful and you are a hockey goalie. Some days you've got people yelling at you and you go home steamed and you ask yourself, why do I do this? You have time to cool off and you're, you know, I just.
I thought I was the only one that.
Yeah. And frankly, it's a point of pride for me too. I love participating in the Commonwealth's communities. If you were to hire me, this would be the 6th city or town that I've worked for in Massachusetts. And I love it. I love the issues that everyone faces. I love contributing to the efforts that people make as members of their community every day. They deserve somebody to come in here and really rattle some cages if I have to. But hopefully I can be more diplomatic about it. But I aggressively love representing towns. I go in there and, you know, I keep in mind that the town's my client, and I try to tell people that all the time, but I do take, it's personal pride for me to make sure that the residents know that they've got competent counsel representing them.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I have one final question. Whether it's this board, the Board of Selectmen, or another independently elected board or an appointed board, they come to you, they make a decision that you can't support or don't support. How do you handle that?
I tell them immediately that I can't support it, I won't sign the contract, I can't give you an opinion that is a yes. And I put in writing, if I have to, no.
Okay.
It's that easy because, you know, it's a slippery slope to, well, you know, council waffled on this. That gave us, everybody a green light. No, I won't let employees or decision makers go down a road that I think will end up with either people getting embarrassed or making a decision that we all have to walk back in public, that can be costly and expensive, end up in litigation, or just really embarrass people. And, you know, the town deserves folks that are going to be thoughtful about the legal issues. Now, that being said, I keep an open mind always, and I'm not the, you know, if I, you know, insist that it's a no and someone brings me information, I'll eat my words and I'll come to you and I'll say, you know what, I was wrong on this. You can do it, and here's why. And, you know, particularly in cases where I say no, I definitely go back and I make sure that it's a definite no. And there's not a way to move forward on something.
Well, hopefully there's that distinction between policy and law where, of course, you know.
Well, right, and I, you know, and I hate to, it's difficult for me to characterize it this way because some people don't like this, some people do. If there's a way, I will fit a square peg in a circle hole within the law.
Mm-hmm.
If there's an agenda of the town and we want to move in a certain direction and there's a way to do it legally, I will try to find that way. If it's impossible legally to do it and we're not authorized to do it or legally able to do it, I'll advise against it.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Kevin. Very much appreciate you being here. I don't know if you have any other further questions for us?
I'm looking forward to hopefully continuing the process with you folks. I'm excited about this. And,
Great.
just glad to have the opportunity anyway.
Nice job
Thank you very
tonight.
much.
Thank you, Kevin.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Kevin.
Thank you. Good luck.
Jim, I think they're looking for you.
I can't see the reflection.
Yeah, I couldn't either until the door opened.
Good evening, Kimberly McMahon.
Mike Walsh.
Nice to meet you, Mr. Walsh.
Will Kincaid, nice to meet you.
Kimberly, nice to meet
Hi,
you.
Kimberly. Nice to meet you. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Sorry we're running late.
Oh, it's quite all right. Thank you for having me.
Guys caught up, good.
Give you 10 seconds to take your breath.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you for waiting. What we've done with the other two candidates is just open the floor to you to tell us, more for the viewing public, what you want to let us know about yourself, your experience, why this job interested you. And then we're going to go and just have a casual back and forth. We'll each ask a couple of questions one at a time, and we'll just see where that dialogue leads us.
Terrific.
All right, so if you want to take the floor, Kimberly, it's all yours.
Thank you. So I'm Kimberly McMahon. I'll maybe start from the beginning of my career. I started working for a small private practice law firm when I was in college. That's where I got my first legal experience. It was great because it was a litigation firm, so before I even applied to law school, I really got to learn about what the business of law was about, so it was a nice experience. I graduated from Boston College, went to Suffolk Law School. After my first year at Suffolk Law School, I interned at the Middlesex District Attorney's Office. That was my first public position. It was just a summer position, but it was my first entry into what state government was all about. I continued on in law school, took an internship class, and took a volunteer for credit position in the legal department at the state treasurer's office. And I was ultimately hired there. I stayed on part-time after the internship, was hired in a part-time position, and then after graduation, I was hired full-time in that position. A good amount of my work there was representation of the State Board of Retirement. I'm sure you're familiar with public pension issues. We handled a lot of hearings concerning various retirement issues, particularly under Mass General Laws Chapter 32. It was a busy office because it handled most of the retirees or members of the retirement board for state positions. I was lucky in law school because the Supreme Judicial Court Rule 303 allows students working in public agencies to gain court experience before graduation. So I started to go to court and to state administrative agencies while I was working there. I got a good amount of litigation experience early on, which was terrific. And then after working there full-time for about a year and a half, I gained a position in the law department for the city of Lowell. And I stayed there for 13 years. It was a combination in-house counsel position as well as a litigation position. There was a very, very busy office. The city of Lowell had about 105 residents during the time that, 105,000, excuse me, residents during the time that I was there. We were self-insured. I believe the city of Lowell still is self-insured, so there were minimal issues that were handled by outside counsel. The vast majority of the issues were handled in-house. We handled probably the same type of issues that you deal with here: discrimination issues, like the Mass Commission Against Discrimination, civil service issues, dealing with the fire department and the police department, zoning board issues, appellate tax board issues, various issues dealing with things like the sprinkler board. We had quite a bit of civil rights litigation under the Federal Code, Section 1983. There was quite a bit of, when I first started the job, there was quite a bit of police litigation all over the state. So we handled those cases in federal court as well as state court. We handled quite a bit of personal injury under the Mass Tort Claim Act. We obviously dealt with in-house issues, so there were a lot of internal meetings, city council meetings, dealing with various departments. We had a very, very active planning department. At the time that I was there, we were under a couple of urban renewal projects. We were dealing with remedying blight. So as a result of that, one of the projects that I was involved with, the city partnered with the local housing authority and demolished a public housing development that had been in a state of disrepair for quite some time. It was an eyesore. It was an unhealthy area. It was unhealthy for the residents. It was an area of high crime. So the city was able to partner with the local housing authority to demolish the public housing units and redevelop into affordable housing. Unfortunately, it resulted in quite a bit of litigation for housing discrimination. So I worked for several years on that litigation. And we were able to settle it, and the area now is a much better, cleaner, prettier, safer area for the citizens of Lowell. we dealt with the school department. When I first started working for the city of Lowell, we were representing the school department. At some point during my tenure there, the school department did hire labor counsel. But we handled, the negligence claims and most of the claims that didn't relate specifically to educational acts for the school department. There was quite a bit of labor work that was involved. I know that you have separate labor counsel here, but we dealt with 17 bargaining units. I was responsible for negotiating 3 of the contracts, but I handled all of the other unions for things like grievances and arbitrations, matters before the JLMC, and the Division of Labor Relations. There were informal grievance proceedings, formal arbitrations, private arbitrations, and litigation that resulted from that, because it was quite a busy office. After I was there for about 13 years, there were a couple of opportunities that opened up down the street at Middlesex Community College, and a couple of colleagues encouraged me to apply. There was a lawyer there who was working in the human resources area that had dealt with quite a bit of the labor and employment legal issues that I was dealing with. So I left and I went to Middlesex for a few years. I did a lot of investigatory work, quite a few employment investigations, a lot of compliance work. My boss retired and I was promoted. And that position was not as legal as the position I had before. It was more financial. So I stayed in that position. I was there with the college for a little over 3 years, and I stayed in that other position for about 1.5 years, but I really missed doing the legal work. And my husband had gone out on his own and hung a shingle and had a practice, and it was a good time for, he needed someone else in the office, so it was a good time for me to join. So I joined his firm in June of 2016, and I've been there since. We have a general practice focusing on various types of litigation, personal injury, employment law, criminal defense, real estate, landlord, tenant, etc. So that's sort of the Reader's Digest version of my legal experience.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you.
Bill?
Yeah, so, the questions I've been asking, I want to be consistent throughout the process. And,
Sure.
One of the things I'm trying to do is understand your thought process, right? When you're deciding whether to litigate or settle a claim. And I don't mean necessarily a claim against the town. The first example I want to use is where we're seeking judgment. We're trying to resolve a matter. I just wanted to understand, maybe how you think and what your thought process is to go from, do I litigate this or do I want to work to settle a claim and maybe there's some amicable way?
Sure. If I could answer that by way of example, one of the trials I had a few years ago when I was working for the city lasted for a couple of weeks, but the litigation itself lasted, I think, for 11 years. So it's draining on not just the lawyers, but the people who are involved in it. It's a case that started off at a small administrative agency, went to a couple of other administrative agencies, went to a jury trial. I don't remember the exact number of counts in the complaint, but I think there were about 10. And I think we won 8 or 9 of them either at the trial or through motions. And we lost one. And that one loss came with a pretty substantial judgment. We ultimately ended winning it on appeal, and I think our position was correct. But we tried the case in December of 2010, and the appeals court ruled on it in the summer of 2013. So there was quite a bit of time to sort of think about that and wonder if I did something wrong. And one of the things that I did after we had that judgment on the one count.
This is a claim against the community or the city?
Yeah, so this was a defense. But one of the things I did was I contacted my brother, who is not a lawyer. He's a financial analyst. He lives in Chicago. And I talked to him about the stress I was under because I was waiting for this appeal. And he had a conversation with me about how, in his world, they deal with risk analysis. And I know there are different models, but he really went to the basic risk analysis model of, identifying the risk, analyzing the risk, and then deciding, am I going to mitigate this risk or am I going to accept this risk? And ever since I had that conversation with him, I really try to sort of narrow it down to those very, very basic principles. And when I work with clients now, I really try to explain to them, look, if we're gonna file suit, this is what you need to know up front. You need to know what the positive result could be, but here's what could happen, what the expenses are. The time commitment that would be involved. So obviously, when you're dealing with a municipality, if you're going to pursue something, you're gonna take time away from several municipal employees who probably already have a full schedule. So you're gonna be taking a substantial amount of time there. Frequently, there are experts involved, and there's an expense to the experts. Goodwill and badwill, that's something that frequently isn't factored in, but needs to be factored in. Who are the community partners, who are the employee partners who would be involved? How will they be affected both positively and negatively? What's the ultimate cost, and is it worth this cost, this effort, for what we could potentially gain from pursuing these claims? In my private practice, I find it very helpful because sometimes people come forward to us and they have a valid claim, but the reality is that the judgment isn't going to be high even if you prevail. So I think it's good to go through that risk analysis. So I obviously look into the legal factors, I look into the statutes, I look into the case law. But that one time in my life where I was so devastated by something that ultimately turned out to be a win for me, it was helpful to go to someone outside of the legal community to take a look at the risk analysis and to have a good outline, I think, at the very beginning of when you're deciding to initiate a process or not.
Yeah, I asked that question because, and you brought up the answer, frankly, is sometimes when you win, you lose.
Correct.
Right? So
Correct.
it's not always as clear,
Mhm.
and as a matter of principle, you may have won.
That's correct. That's
But the
correct.
cost to the community or the cost to the resources, not just dollars, right?
Mhm.
Could be substantial. So I appreciate the fact that you walked me through the process and outlined it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Mike?
Thank you. Thank you again for being here this evening.
Pleasure.
My question is not to put you on the spot, but help me wrap my head around. Your background starts basically at the state level,
Yes.
and you go into the municipal level,
Mhm.
then you go back into basically the state level at the Director of Human Resources, and now into private practice.
Yes.
Why do you want to come back into municipal law?
The answer is easy. I saw the posting in Lawyers Weekly. After I read the posting, I was still thinking about it a couple of days later. Caused me to read the posting again. It prompted me to go onto your website. Google's a wonderful thing. The posting, it included a lot of the things that I really enjoyed about my job when I was working for a municipal government. I enjoyed looking at your website. I think that you have a terrific website. It seems to be very transparent. You have a lot of interesting things going on here. The purchase of the water utility, I think, is a very interesting prospect for this town. I will admit that purchasing a water utility is not something that's in my experience, so I was happy to learn that you have outside counsel for that.
There's only, 6 communities that have dealt with it, so.
But it was something that was really interesting. Coming from a city where there's a huge immigrant population, it was interesting to see a town where you have a long history of an immigrant population. You don't always see that when you're dealing with towns. And I just thought that you have a very interesting community here. I thought the posting was interesting. And after I looked at it a couple of times and it prompted me more than once to go onto your website, I thought I should apply because it seemed like an interesting opportunity for me, and it seemed as though my experience fit within your job posting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A question I've asked each one of the candidates is, how would you compensate for the lack of institutional knowledge that kind of walked out the door when Jerry Moody left after being here almost 40 years? There's no doubt about your education and your qualifications, but obviously coming into a town where prior boards and committee members have had the same, and employees have had the same attorney for literally 4 decades.
Well, the question I was preparing for you to ask me was, what sort of challenges do you think that you would encounter if you were the successful candidate? And what I was going to tell you is, it's really hard to fill the shoes of someone who has been here for 39 years. And as I was sitting outside waiting to come in here, I heard a person say, no one's going to fill Jerry's shoes. So, so I do recognize that as being a challenge. And the proper response to that is probably, you don't want to come in and fill someone's shoes.
Right.
He is someone who I'm sure is very well respected. He has a vast amount of experience, but institutional knowledge is a huge benefit that is walking out the door with him. So, and I talked about some of this at my first interview. I think there are a few things that would be key to, I don't know if it's a challenge that you're meeting or if it's a goal that you want to achieve, but first and foremost, I think that it would be important for the successful candidate in this position to meet the key players in the municipality, and I think that would be internally and externally. I think it would be important to meet with all the department heads. I'm sure you have department heads here who have been working here for quite some time, and they have quite a bit of institutional knowledge. It's important to develop trust and a good working relationship with them, because the successful candidate is going to need them to share that institutional knowledge. My understanding is that you have an excellent paralegal in the office. I think it would be good to develop an excellent working relationship with that person, because that person will be key to success.
As well as an associate counsel, just to let you know.
And an associate counsel as well.
Yeah, that we use for collective bargaining. I think some of that has been missed.
For the, okay, so the labor council. Oh, and will that person be Mr. Moody? Or is that to be determined?
I think it's currently an opening.
Oh, it's an opening, okay, I see. So yes, certainly that would
And
be.
that was another individual that was doing that work for the last almost same
Not
amount
quite
of
that long,
time,
but a
right?
long time.
Oh, okay, I apologize, I didn't realize
Oh,
that.
no,
So
no, that's
that
okay.
would be another, key partner to be
Sure,
working
you
with. It would be important, I think, to meet with people like Mr. Valani and find out more about your community. Obviously, I've tried to study it to prepare for this interview, but you can't learn about that just by looking at the internet. You need to meet with people to find out who the people are in the community who are, working very closely with the people in town hall and in local government. I had the opportunity to meet with Laura Mann at my first interview, who seems like a wonderful community member. She seems very involved, and I'm sure you have a very involved community in general, so I think it would be important to meet with those people. The other thing that I think is important, and I did speak with Mr. Moody about this, you may or may not know, there's a Municipal Lawyers Association. I think it's important to be involved in that association. Some of the municipal law departments, like Lowell, have quite a few lawyers, so if you get an issue and you really need to bounce ideas off someone, you just have to walk down the hall and talk to somebody. And that's not the case when you're in a smaller legal department. So I think it's important to make sure that the successful candidate for this position maintains good relationships with that organization, because just about every municipal lawyer in the state is involved with that. They have a great listserv. It's a great resource at a very minimal cost for attorneys in this type of a position. I don't know that anyone can ever fill the shoes of Jerry, but I also think it would be really good to the extent possible, to meet with him before he's in Paris or wherever he's going to be enjoying his
He does like
retirement.
Paris.
But to meet with him and find out where he thinks that there are challenges for the office, what he thinks that a person in that position should know, who he thinks they should know. There are little things like where things are stored physically in the office that
Where the minefields are.
where the minefields are, but even where the files are kept.
Sure.
So there are lots of things that would need to be done, I think, and I think that you're really lucky that you had someone for 39 years of his caliber, and hopefully he'll be a good resource
I
to
would agree with you.
whoever the successful candidate is.
Great answer, thank you. Bill?
Yeah, so there are a significant amount of challenges that many municipalities face, but I wanted to see what you think maybe the top two are, and municipality cities across the Commonwealth, and also I wanted to get your sense what challenges you've looked into, seen based on your investigation or review of what Milford's facing. There's a great deal that's out there in the public domain, so
Sure.
I'm just curious. What do you think
So-
a couple are in the state, and then what do you think a couple might be here?
The first two that I would say for just about everybody in the state is, limited budgets. And the second, I would say, based upon my work in the city, my current work, as well as just being a Massachusetts citizen, I think is the opioid crisis. I think, that obviously municipalities are dealing with litigation about that, but it's really something that affects people every single day. It's affecting our police departments, it's affecting affecting our fire departments, it's affecting our public health departments. The courts are backed up because of criminal charges involving opiates. In my experience with some of my public and private work, workers' compensation cases are affected by it. People's livelihood. People are not recovering from injuries they otherwise would have recovered because of these addictions, unfortunately, to the opiates. So I do see that as something that's affecting people at local and state levels in just about every municipality in the state. In terms of the budgets, my experience has been that sometimes it's challenging to resolve cases because municipalities have such limited funding in their settlement funds. I think it's something that you need to manage, and I do think it's manageable, but it is challenging because, as we were talking about before, there are some cases that aren't worth pursuing for several reasons. And although I don't think you should make that decision without a lot of counsel, without a lot of investigation and collaboration, certainly there are cases that you shouldn't defend to the end, you shouldn't prosecute to the end, you should look into resolving it. And sometimes that involves a significant amount of funding. I remember once talking to one of the administrative judges for the Department of Industrial Accidents on a workers' comp case, and it was outside of work. And I just said, you know, what do you think places can do, like with the place where I work? And he said, there's nothing else you can do. Every municipality has a challenge, and it's because of funding. And frequently, when a municipality is self-insured, the challenges are even greater. So budgeting, I think, is always going to be a challenge. And I have never been on the revenue-generating side of work for state and municipal government. I know that's another challenge that needs to be dealt with to face these things. But I also think that collaboration with the municipal partners, going outside of the legal department, talking to the town manager, town administrator, talking to the department heads, that's how you manage the budgets and make it so that when you need to settle something, that it can be at a reasonable rate and you can manage your department budget and the town budget.
What challenges for Milford?
Well, as I told you, one of the things that I found interesting was the purchase of the water department. So one of the challenges I see there,
Still ongoing, right?
it's still ongoing. How long will that take? And I can't say I'm intimately familiar with your budget, but you'll be taking on a substantial number of employees. The cost of healthcare is going up, as everybody knows. That's something that's not, a secret to anybody. So I think that will maybe be a challenge because it's going to bring on significant liability. But it seems as though the town and Mr. Moody have done a substantial amount of investigation and have determined that this is in the best interest of the town. So it sounds like this is a risk that is worth taking.
And town meeting agreed.
Did I miss, was there one other question?
No, no.
Okay.
No, you're hitting the big ones, so, well done. I can see why you're here.
Oh, thank you very much.
Mike?
Kim, every city, every town in the Commonwealth has them. They're called blighted properties or problem properties. If you were lucky enough to get the position of town council, how would you work with the Board of Selectmen? How would you work with different department heads to proactively either bring these, whether they're private homes with taxes in the rears or business properties with taxes in the rears? We have a couple of business properties that are less than desirable to look at. What would your plan be to work with the Board of Selectmen and other department heads to say, we need to proactively go after this?
So I think that's another situation that involves partnership with many different entities and departments. Your code enforcement folks would need to be involved. So health department, building department. I think the community relations are involved in that as well, finding out where the community is concerned about different types of properties that are in deplorable condition or less than desirable condition. Having worked in a municipality, there were frequently lists in the planning department that I was aware of for properties that were of concern. I do think it's important to be working with property managers. Sometimes there are absentee landlords who don't even know that there's a problem. So I think it's good to start working with them, before, again, jumping into something like litigation and going to court, you want to work with the landlords. But there's so many, if you exhaust the friendly relationships and you're not able to amicably resolve the issues, there are tax title takings, eminent domain proceedings, urban renewal projects. But I think that there needs to be buy-in and collaboration from both internal folks as well as the community at large to make sure that you're doing what the community wants, what is best for the community, and what is affordable.
Thank you.
Kimberly, and you definitely touched on it in your introduction, and when I was going through all your information over the weekend, you have so much employee relations and human resource background, everything like that. Can you just tell us a little bit about any experience you have? And I think you may have touched on it, so excuse me, with like land use, planning, permitting, licensing, anything else?
Sure.
Outside of that?
I handled several eminent domain cases. Most of them we were able to resolve, as most of those cases do. I did try one case in Lowell right now. They're building a new courthouse, and it's in an area that's part of a larger urban renewal project. Unfortunately, I think I tried the case in 2009, and they're just getting to build the courthouse right now. So obviously, it goes back to what I was saying about how long these projects frequently take. So I was not in charge of the order of taking, but I was involved in the initial process. I was certainly involved when litigation started, so involved when there were appraisers coming in and developing fair market value for several of these properties that were taken. I worked rather closely with the Zoning Board of Appeals, defended the members in court, also worked with them at their meetings, dealt with local zoning issues, tried to resolve them before they became real issues. Tried, cases, there were bench trials, but for zoning issues. Represented the planning board in litigation. I didn't do as much in-house work for the planning board, but I worked quite a bit with the planning department. When I was in Lowell, there was quite a bit of activity going on there, and they still do, they have a very large planning department. So I worked on several housing issues there, federal and state. Planning, zoning, land use.
Yep.
Did
Licensing, that's it. And I didn't expect you to touch on all of it.
Licensing, I worked with the License Commission. The License Commission, when I was in the legal department in Lowell, was part of our office. So we went to, several of those meetings. The License Commission was rather busy in Lowell, so that was
Well,
part
for all
of
their
it.
redevelopment, new restaurants and things
Yes.
like that, okay.
Yeah.
We are the license commission in this.
You are,
municipality, yes.
okay.
No, thank you. Bill?
Just the last question, if, I expect that the process will carry forward just a little bit. I don't want to delay the process, but I think there's some basics in terms of understanding, checking references, looking at background, asking for conflict forms if there's any, potential conflicts that we may not be aware of. What I'm curious to know is, when we call those references, can you think of one or two traits that you think would be consistent in those references that people would characterize you and use in terms of trait?
I know that I identified supervisor from the law department in Lowell as well as a colleague. And we all worked together on quite a bit of litigation. I would expect and hope that they would identify me as a team player. We worked together quite a bit on in-house issues, litigation issues, but we really also had to work with other municipal partners. We were working very, very closely with various department heads, elected officials. So I would hope that they would see me as a team player, and I really think that's necessary for just about any position when you're working in municipal government. On the more technical side, I think they would identify me as a litigator because I did do quite a bit of litigation. And what I enjoyed tremendously as part of being a litigator was the research and motion practice. I think they would I think they would let you know, because I did a lot of work with them. I enjoyed researching. I enjoyed writing. We would frequently, draft and redraft and go over motions together. So I would think that they would see that as one of my traits in terms of being a fellow lawyer, what I enjoy doing most.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Mike?
I as well have one final one. I'd like to just hear from you how you feel, being a director of human resources and an attorney, coming into this job, how that position will help you on the day-to-day when you have to deal with employees, the department heads that are having a problem with an employee, but you, having been a director of human resources, has the ability to see that side and also the legal side.
Well, quite a bit of that position involved informal mediation. And I really think it's important that when you have an issue, whether it's between colleagues or a supervisor and employee, to make your best efforts to try to resolve it promptly, to resolve it confidentially. So I would hope that my communication skills would help if someone came into my office and said they were having problems with an employee or having problems with a boss, that we could sit down and rather amicably and swiftly resolve an issue before it becomes a problem. Sometimes there aren't issues that can be resolved quickly. And sometimes there's a conflict if you're representing a department head and the employee comes in to complain about their boss. But I, am aware of obviously the legal employment issues that come into play for public employees, because that's been a big part of my job since basically graduating from law school. And I have had to counsel employees frequently. You can't just not take the conflict of interest test because you don't want to. Little things like that. But through both my work as a lawyer as well as my work in human relations, I've done a lot of mediation, and I really think it's great when you can sit down at a table and hash out your differences, really, like I said, before an issue becomes a problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kimberly, my final question. A board, whether it's the Board of Selectmen or another independently elected board or appointed committee, makes a decision and you cannot support it as the town council, how would you proceed?
Professionally, I always like to follow advice that my father gave me and that my kid's principal also gives them. Proper preparation prevents poor performance. So I think that if I couldn't support your position, I would need to make sure that I was researching my position, make sure that I had all the facts straight, make sure that I was aware of all the case law, statutes, regulations, bylaws, precedent involved, and make sure that I give you an informed, factual, and legal opinion so that you're aware of, again, what the risks might be if you decide to take an action that was contrary to what I believe was correct. I think I would need to carefully consider things like the open meeting law to determine whether or not I should be giving you that opinion in an open public meeting or whether it should be an executive session. But I certainly do think that if you hire counsel, you are entitled to an honest legal opinion from your counsel, even if it means that I or whoever the successful candidate is would be disagreeing with you.
That's terrific. I appreciate that. Any other questions?
No, I just wanted to congratulate Kimberly. It's the screening committee that worked for us, helped us, has made it very difficult on us. And it's clear to me, based on your background, the way you present yourself, and that why you're here, right? That you've done well to get here, and you've done well here tonight. I just wanted to congratulate you on that and wish you the best of luck.
Well, thank you. I very much appreciate that, and thank you for having me here.
Thank you very
More on
much.
that.
Yeah, thank you.
It was a pleasure to meet you all. Thank you.
Have a good night.
You as well.
Well, that concludes the interviews and the agenda for this evening's meeting. Motion to adjourn or any other business that we,
Just wanted to talk with Rick, because I had talked to him a little bit about some of those things that we might want to do before we consider making an offer. they delay slightly, but, and it's my goal not to delay this process. But I think, you know, background, I think references, and getting an understanding of potential areas of conflict from each of the candidates is important to helping us make our decisions.
No, I think that's key, and that's why I think I went right into just wanting to, you know, at least put, I didn't want to, I know I can't make a decision this evening, so it goes on, those things, also the copious amount of notes that we all took, the questions. Obviously, our screening committee did a fantastic job of finding qualified
they did.
candidates. They told us any one of these three could do the job, can do the job, and now we have the work to do to make the choice. And I think with that, it is their background, the references, and I appreciate we need to, anytime you hire a position at this level, especially a town council, you want to know if there's any possible conflicts of interest, so. Rick, what we were just discussing was, no, that's okay, I'm glad you
okay.
walked Kimberly out. Where we are is, and Bill had brought it up first, that, you know, I think it's fair to say that we're not looking to make a decision this evening. We didn't want to, we weren't
You're all
looking.
aware of that.
We weren't looking to delay the process, but I want to credit you, again, you weren't in the room. What we did was credit you and the search committee, that you guys were absolutely right, that any one of these three people are obviously capable of doing the job and could do the job. I know I took copious amounts of notes, I'm sure as did my colleagues, so we have a lot of information to go over, and luckily, we have a meeting 1 week from today, a regularly scheduled meeting. So if we could get, and Bill, you brought it up, I don't know if you want to say it, I just, what I think
You
what
and I
we're
have talked,
thinking
so-
is, oh, okay.
I've talked
I have
about
talked.
it a little bit, yeah.
What I'm thinking, and Mike, you know, chime in as well, is that we have to check their references.
That's the next step, references.
We want to check to see whatever possible conflict of interests exist in the town of Milford.
It could,
if there
depending
is
on
any.
their caseload, possible, yes.
I'm gonna steal Laura Mann for a second.
We will check.
Part of our search committee.
Laura, I'd like you to come sit up here, please. You are still on air. No, please. Come on, you're already embarrassed. I'm all right. Come on in. We were just singing your praises.
I thought you were doing the interviews.
We just finished.
Just finished seconds ago.
And I'm going to say it for the third time, because Rick wasn't in the room when I said it the first time, but now we caught you. Thank you very much.
Oh, no problem.
And we really wanted a process where it was void of politics. We asked you to chair it. We asked you to screen people, interview people. And what Rick told us was that the three that we were going to interview tonight, any one of them is capable.
Yes, I agree. I
And-
wouldn't have put up names that I didn't think were qualified, so.
No, and you know what? You said that right from the get-go from our first phone call when I asked you to do this, and I just can't thank you enough. You said what an honor it was for you to do it for us. You were just a class act, and I really appreciate that, because
Thank you.
these three folks really impressed us. We were just talking, we are not making a decision tonight. We took copious notes. There's a lot to compare and contrast among the three. You know, two have more similar backgrounds than a third one, but they're just very competitive.
Yeah, good.
I don't know if you want to add anything to that, or tell us anything about the process that we
No, it was a good
probably
process.
don't
Jed
know.
and I worked well together. Rick and Jerry sat in on all of the interviews. I think it was helpful. They didn't ask any questions really, but they were there to just give us sort of the input that we needed from the town perspective, which was not what Jed and I have experience in. And I thought it was a good process, that I think have a good sense of the community, that, but I have no experience on the town administrative side, and I think Rick did a great job, and Jerry did also, obviously, giving us the input that we needed.
Would
And
you
I
do
think
the
they
process again?
excuse me?
Yeah, would you replicate the process if?
I think this was a good process. I
Okay.
think that it's good to have people from different backgrounds, but then to have the support and input from the town employees that are actually doing it, because they came up with things that we didn't think of, and I'm sure we came up with things that they hadn't focused on, because we were looking at it from different angles. And I thought it was a good process, and I appreciate the opportunity to help the town that I've lived in for 30 years, even though I'm still an outsider, I assume, because it's only been 30 years, so.
Like me, you'll never be a Milfordian.
I won't, I'm married to one, but that's about it, so, no, thank you.
No,
So good luck with that, it's
I
a
feel
tough
very
decision.
comfortable with
I think they all were very good, they had different parts And I think that it'll be a tough decision, but that's
It will
your
be.
decision, not mine.
Aren't you
Okay?
glad?
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
again,
you.
Laura. And you are on the list of, you know, possible help in the future, so.
I don't have a problem with that.
All right, thanks, Laura.
Thank you, Laura.
Rick, so just to go back to what we were talking about, do you think a week is enough time for
Yes,
you to check
yeah.
references?
I've started
You have
some
already.
of the process.
Do you need help, external or otherwise?
I don't think I do. I have a
Okay.
potential to
I just wanna make
get
that
help, though
available.
I have a source that I think
Because
is
we
available.
do have a time frame, and, one of the things I'm always mindful of when you have good candidates, right? You don't want to hold them,
Yeah, no, we could get, I've started some of the checking with the Board of Bar
I
overseers,
just,
things of that nature.
okay, I
yeah.
just want to give you
Yep.
whatever resource you
Yep.
need.
If I need it, thank
If
you.
there's an external resource
Okay.
required, I think
Appreciate that.
we should be prepared to do that.
Okay.
Reference checks, background,
Yep.
and that conflict. And I say conflict because, we're hiring for a significant position. And you want that person to come in, without conflict, without, or at least have it be known.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to hire somebody in a small state of Massachusetts or even Rhode Island nearby, where somebody comes in and you find out, well, they're representing the largest landholder in town, or they, so, and I don't even know who, I'm just making things up, but my point is simply, it's not that that would necessarily preclude someone, but it is helpful to be informed, so that you can make informed decision. So that's, and we all, could benefit from that.
Great. No, I'll have everything done in time for you.
Okay?
Mike, any comment, questions?
We're gonna be busy.
What is it?
We're gonna be busy.
Oh, absolutely. No escaping that.
Those are three great candidates.
Very
Nice
impressive.
job.
Bar and Jed did a nice, they
I was just gonna
actually,
say, nice job
they
by that
whittled
committee.
down the pool of 11 to those three, and
Okay.
they get, I think, the credit there for that.
Outstanding.
Thank you for being there, Rick, and
Thank
being
you.
part of
Thank
it.
you.
I'll make a motion to adjourn, Mr. Chairman.
I'll second that, Mr. Chairman.
And I'll also vote in favor and make that unanimous. Have a good night, everyone.